My sincere apologies. These things never go according to plan, and there was a bit of a technical hiccup there. So apologies to keep everyone waiting. Thank you so much for coming along today. You'll see as part of the technical hiccup, I've not even had a chance to put a background on. So again, apologies for the skeleton in the background. Um, so thank you everyone for joining us today for our LGBTQ plus webinar. Really interested. I'll do a quick introduction. My name is Lindsay Thompson, and I work as part of Lifelink Workwell. I will be the host for today and will be guiding you through the conversation. We also have Kirsty Allen, who is part of Lifelink Workwell as one of our service managers. And we have two external panelists today. We have Lou Beardsmore, who is CEO and founder of Proud Futures. And we are just waiting on Jamie Jefferson, who is co-founder and creative director at Equator, who will be with us in a couple of moments. So today, I'm really keen to chat through some of the challenges that the LGBTQ community face in the workplace, and what can we do to make that better, to create a more inclusive, supportive, positive culture. Conscious that a lot of people on the call today come with an HR background, so there is already a level of understanding there. Hopefully we're not preaching to the converted. Something that we're really keen to do is actually speak to the challenges that you have within your organisation today. So we've got a couple of questions already that have come through. If there is anything from anyone else during the webinar that you would like to share with us, please ping it in the chat, and we'll be more than happy to pick that up as part of the conversation and address that. So I think we'll get started, if that's okay, in the essence of time. We'll pick questions up as we go along and we'll address those. So just to get us started, LGBTQ plus, sometimes there is I and A added on to the end. I think it just depends, but I don't think there's any hard and fast rule as to which way is the correct to introduce the community into your organisations. So by that we mean lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer or questioning, intersex and asexual. So just so that everyone's clear that the term that we're talking about in that community, and that refers to sexual orientation, romantic orientation or gender identity. I think it's really important to make sure that we know. Oh, hi, Jamie.
Hi there, I'm so sorry, I was struggling to get on.
Don't worry, I had some technical issues, so we have kicked off a little bit late. I've already done an introduction to everyone on your behalf.
Thank you very much. Hope it was nice.
It was lovely, thank you. So I think we will just get started, if that's okay. I'm going to open up to the panelists and I'm going to talk a lot less than I have been. I'd be really interested just to hear from the panel some of the day-to-day challenges that the LGBTQ community face in the workplace. So whether that is something you face directly or whether it's something you see in your organisation. So if I could pass it over to the panel, if anyone wants to kick that off and just talk about some of the challenges that we see in organisations.
Shall I go?
Come to Lou first.
Okay, go for Lou. Yeah, go for that.
Okay. Yeah, it's interesting. I sort of hesitate because I could go into statistics, which I'm sure lots of HR people on the call just now know already. They'll be aware of a rise in workplace discrimination, workplace bullying. They'll be aware of a rise in the wider environment of a rise in hate crimes against LGBTQ plus people, specifically trans and non-binary. And as soon as you add in more intersectionalities, Black trans people, trans women, it's even worse. So I'm sure everyone, it's a bit of a dark picture, but I'm sure everyone's aware of the work context, the wider context, and indeed the global context in terms of the rollback of LGBTQ plus rights globally. So any organisations on who have who work outside the UK will be aware. We've had to do risk assessments for staff travelling to Turkey and various areas where it was previously safe, and it's no longer safe to send LGBT staff. So that's the statistics. But I often think what's most powerful is lived experience. So perhaps I can share a little bit about my own lived experience, which was actually the reason that I started Proud Futures. So Proud Futures, we specialise in LGBT inclusion and training and creating workplaces that are safe. And I was going to share a story of when I was 25. One of my first experiences of kind of workplace discrimination. I was working in investments in Charlotte Square. I thought it was in my dream job at the time. I'd done very well, won an award, got on very well with my team. And at the Christmas party, I was encouraged by the guys in my team to bring along my girlfriend at the time. I wasn't necessarily out at work, but they'd felt quite confident that it would be fine. So I brought her along to my work's Christmas do. And the next morning, that was 20 years ago now. The next morning, I was met in reception by HR. I almost said her name there, still in my head. The woman in HR took me, I knew her very well, took me to a room and said, "I'm really sorry, and you're being let go today." And she had a box full of my belongings. And she said, "The owners and the senior management team just don't think you share the same family values." And I walked out of the workplace there completely shocked. I was very young at the time. I didn't have the agency that I have now. And I realized that overperformance wasn't a form of self-protection. And I think a lot of queer people in the workplace, use overperformance and feel they're protected, but actually there's so much discrimination that goes on. So I share that because I think what the seeds of Proud Futures is, I never wanted that to happen to anyone else. So we started the organisation 3 years ago when we seen things getting worse for the community. So yeah, I share that story. I think it plays out differently for everybody. I think for some people, they've experienced the extreme end. I shared that story at a conference and 9 people came up to me afterwards to share their own similar stories. So it was not an isolated incident. And there's a few emotional people, I'm sure who looked emotional in the audience that maybe had their own stories as well. So there's losing your job. There's bullying and harassment. And there's also just not feeling a sense of belonging. The practical things, I'm sure toilets will come up at some point. I'm sorry to mention it 10 minutes in, but I'm sure they will. But even feeling safe and a sense of belonging is an issue. So yeah, I'm gonna stop there. I could talk lots more, but I just wanted to share a bit of my own lived experience. And I'll hand over to yourself, Jamie.
Thanks. If I could just interject there, Kirsty and I are very, very lucky in that Lifelink Workwell and Lifelink, our sister organisation, is a very inclusive and supportive environment. So the LGBTQ plus community in Lifelink Workwell, I certainly hope do not feel any level of discrimination when they are coming into work. But I guess the same can't be said across some other industries. And I'm wondering if generational opinions can form a bit of a challenge in the workplace as well. So I was keen just to open that up. I mean, you only have to look at the military as an example, or look at professional sports. And you talk about 20 years, Lou. That shouldn't have been happening 20 years ago. Before you said 20 years, that feels like something that should have been 50, 60, 70 years ago that people were facing those situations, not 20 years ago. But as I say, when you look at the scale of professional sport and you look at the scale of the military and how late to the party they have come in terms of inclusion, it's quite shocking. So do you feel, and again, open to anyone in the panel, do you feel that certain industries are lagging behind? Do you feel that generation is a challenge?
I mean, I can't speak for many different sectors. I think that I think it's fairly well understood that it isn't, that it is different depending on the sector. So that's fair to say that's a given. I think it's an easy thing to say that to think that there is an older generation that just don't get it and the younger generation do. I think it's actually more complicated than that. One thing I think that's really interesting when I look at there's a very specific demographic that are anti-trans these days. They seem to be the ones that are, to some extent, not able to stop themselves going down a pipeline online because they are very online, but they're not very online literate. So there's a sort of age of people that seem to be kind of very, very sensitive to that. Certainly people who are older and not online as much I've found tend to be a lot more accepting, and younger people too. So I think, yes, there are generational issues, but I don't think it's a kind of simple story. I think that to go on to sort of more general challenge. No, actually, I'll stop because I'll monologue all day if you if you let me. That's my view on that. Like, Kirsty, maybe you've got I mean, you guys have more, I'm sure, experience in different sectors than I do.
I think when we're working with employers, we do see, I wouldn't go so far as to name any specific sectors, but we do have an understanding of, we work in mental health and we're really aware of inclusivity and being empathetic and compassionate. So our first-hand experience is going to be really different from people who come from different sectors. And a lot of that is to do with the culture within those organisations. And a lot of it does come top down as well. In terms of generational, I think we need to be a wee bit careful, and it's not really, sometimes we use that as an excuse for many different things. And maybe it comes across as there's a lack of understanding or education, and we need to be quite careful around that, because as Lou said, it isn't as black and white as that, and we do see a lot of variance.
Great. I'm going to put the first question to you, if that's okay, Kirsty, because it follows on nicely. So one of the questions that came in prior to the webinar starting is, what are some ways managers can confidently address biased comments or microaggressions in the workplace without alienating?
I think that's quite a difficult one, actually. It's about, I think there's a real level of people feeling really, really uncomfortable about addressing issues within themselves, their own like understanding and knowledge. People are really, really unsure. And we find that quite a lot when we speak to people, is that they don't, I don't know how to address this person, and I don't know how to ask them about their pronouns and such. And I think that's something that will take time for people to learn. However, being able to address that is the same way that you would address any other sort of discrimination. We need to ensure that when we're approaching individuals, we're not coming across in a way that's going to make them feel attacked. But we need to be able to point that out as managers, and to make people aware of their behaviour and how it makes other people feel and how it affects other people, because it's not just that singular instance that people that are part of the community are dealing with. It is the levels that go beyond that, because it's not just in workplace, it's actually outside of work, it's all day. And I think the least that we can do is make sure that we have got some advice from people who have lived experience, and we speak to our team members who identify as part of the community and see how they actually feel in terms of culture, and do the policies that we have actually support them, or are they lip service? And opening up that conversation and normalising it can be a really good step.
And I think that's really important, Kirsty, and that's something that I was keen to understand more about, is before we get into policies and procedures, but just to understand, what are some of the challenges, the mental health challenges, and the impact it can have on mental health, both in the workplace, but also in wider life. So as a member of the LGBTQ+ community, what are the additional factors that can detrimentally impact your mental health that organisations need to be thinking about and be proactive in supporting? Lou, if I could start off with you first.
Yeah.
I think just to echo what everyone said before, listening to lived experience. So some organisations do this fantastically well. We've worked with, universities to corporates across sectors. So I'd echo that it's not a specific sector issue. In some ways, lots of corporate organisations have more resources and have LGBT networks and DEI leads, and are actually sometimes trailblazing. Sometimes charities can fall back and, well, we're a charity. We're lovely to everyone and we're a nice place to work, without actually asking their staff how they experience the workplace as an LGBTQ+. So yes, I think it is quite complex. But yeah, I think workplaces have to be proactive at the moment. In terms of, I've seen some workplaces, if you talk about best practice, being really explicit about their trans inclusion policies, being really explicit about the LGBT inclusion policies, having statements on their website. As soon as you walk into the workplaces, I was somewhere last week that they had everyone's welcome here sign as I walked into reception. They had some trans flag and LGBT flag lanyards. They had pronouns. there's about 10 signs of safety before I even get into my meeting with the chief exec. So I was like, I, as a provider, feel really safe in this space. So that's the first thing. Staff can't challenge if they don't feel they're backed up by the organisation. So the organisation have to do work first, and then you can do things like bystander training. For people that aren't aware of that, it's about equipping your workforce to recognise what's discrimination, and perhaps just what's someone getting it wrong or not knowing. And it's about having compassionate conversations. So we have a model where we train on that. So I think there's two things there. One, about the organisation taking responsibility to create that culture, and then training your staff so they feel backed up to have those conversations and uphold that culture of diversity and inclusion. Yeah, and I think the first thing we do with an organisation is do an anonymous poll, and that will tell you everything you need to know, because sometimes people say everything's great in our workplace, and then we do a survey with the staff, and it's incredible what people share, and I suspect they share it because we're an LGBT and trans-led organisation. So that in itself is a sign of safety. We're not an independent management company coming in. We're saying, we have lived experience. We know how tough it can be in the workplace. We want to understand what are your specific challenges, and that will allow us to do a specific solution. So it's not one size fits all for an organisation. We need to be really careful about that. But yeah, I just want to hand it over to Jamie. You obviously run your own organisation as well, so I'm sure I have lots to say.
Thanks, Lou. I was actually literally just thinking I didn't put my pronouns on my name, and then I don't know how to do that, so I'm just going to not try to pay attention to what I'm supposed to be saying. I think that there are levels to this, right? So I think it's really, really easy when you're not the target of kind of hate or abuse or, division, to not see it and not understand why it's a big deal for people. I think it's really, really important to understand that there are kind of a couple of starting positions that a lot of LGBTQ plus people have, right? So there'll be a lot of people who are coming, if they're out, they're coming from a point of having experienced quite extreme trauma. So it's well documented that trans people who, before they come out, 40% of them have had suicidal ideation, that kind of thing. So a huge amount of people at a very, very low ebb. That doesn't just go away when you come out. That still is there in the background. And so, that is already your starting position. The other starting position is what's going on in the world before you walk in the door. So if what's going on in the world before you walk in the door, or when you go home and turn your TV on, is continual, debate about whether you have the right to exist in public or go to the toilet, or these sorts of things, then that's your starting position. So if I'm starting from a position of already having had experienced trauma, and that trauma being supported by how I experience the world, those signs of safety that Lou described, that may seem kind of like, why do people need this? If you're looking at it from a point, if you're already feeling safe, they seem surplus to requirements, because of course we're nice to people. You can start to understand how vital that is, that when I walk in off the street, I can register, I'm safe here, right? And then I can start to relax. And what's the point of doing that, right? The point of doing that is every single staff member, everybody in the world, I would argue, has some things that they don't feel comfortable about who they are, whether they're, it doesn't matter whether they're LGBTQ plus, everybody might be just your taste in music or your fashion sense. Everybody has something. And I think that in order to do a good job in our lives, to sort of thrive, you need to feel safe and comfortable and accepted in your peer group. The more that companies can do that, the better they can work. And so all of that stuff and all of those signs, the kind of pride flags or whatever, they shouldn't just symbol to LGBTQ plus people that they're safe. It should be a symbol for everybody to say who you are is the point of safety here. So I think that's an important starting point. So when you combine that, and I think the difficulty many businesses have is that people who aren't directly experiencing that have difficulty empathizing. So and the conversation has to be, helping businesses understand the why of what they're doing. It's not just we have to do it because it's a nice thing to do. It's actually, in very real terms, a business advantage, actually, if you do this right.
And that's something I'd like to dig a little deeper into, Jamie. So policies and procedures are important because that safeguards staff, but really in every organisation, those policies and procedures should be your hygiene factor. They should be the baseline of what you do. That should not tick the box and you move on. So I think for everyone on the call, it's vitally important to make sure that all of those policies and procedures are up to date in your organisation, are well understood with everyone in your organisation. But it's about what are the things that you could do today? So what are some of the things that would really make a positive difference in your organisation today? But also, what do you need to do as a business leader to drive a deeper understanding and inclusive culture? And I think that's the bit that's really important here, is how do you drive a more supportive culture? Now, one of the questions that had come in that sort of touches on the what can you do today? Where do you get started? Because quite often it's I don't know what to do here, so we're not doing much because we don't know where to start. So someone has asked, what are the practical tips on getting engagement in working groups and getting actual events to be owned by members of the groups? And I think it's also important that it shouldn't just be people who are part of the community in these groups. It needs to be across the organisation. It needs to be inclusive with everyone. So how do we start to get that engagement? Because that starts to build the culture across organisations.
I think what comes up there, sorry, for me is like really, we're talking about culture, but like actually digging into that. So building the trust with individuals. People aren't going to step forward and head your group or whatever it might be for you as a business if they don't actually trust and believe in what they're representing. So things I'm thinking about are making sure that the policy does support them, making sure that there is support there for them if they need it. So Lou and I briefly spoke about specialist support. So like at Lifelink Workwell, we have counselling, which is LGBTQ plus informed counselling, that comes from people who have lived experience, which is what we hear in terms of feedback. But then making a genuine effort to invest, so not rainbow washing. Lou and Jamie have both spoke about actually things being visual and being able to see all year round that actually we are bought in to supporting individuals, and it's not just for that 1 month out of the year.
Awesome.
Kirsty, probably a good point to touch on. What are some of the benefits of counselling? So, Jamie, you've touched on suicidal ideation and the struggles that people feel and having low mood, low mental health. What are some of the benefits of that counselling that can be provided? Kirsty, what's the impact of that?
I guess psychological well-being, psychological safety is at the top of the list there. We use outcome measurements and it's evidence-based. We can see that people present higher at the start of their counselling and lower at the end of their counselling. And throughout that, it can help them to either support themselves in approaching their organisation or their manager to advocate for themselves, and giving them that space to be able to reflect and build on that confidence-wise is a really massive thing for individuals.
And I think something else that's important, counselling is very important on an individual one-to-one level, but I think there are lots of wellbeing groups and wellbeing topics that can be awareness driving and very inclusive across the organisation. So Kirsty, you've probably got a couple of examples of different wellbeing classes that would drive that opportunity for groups to get together and create that positive and engaged culture.
Yeah, definitely. I think Lou, this is probably maybe more your kind of remit in terms of training, but you would do specific training. We provide things like groups on resilience and groups on confidence, which can be really helpful.
Yeah, I wanted to answer, build on what you've said, Kirsty, but also answer something that Ellen Fitzsimmons has said, which is a great question, Ellen, thank you for asking it, is around, you know, when organisations have done so much already, we've done the campaigns, we've done Pride, we've talked about allyship, But the challenge is now inconsistent behaviour. So it's like a cultural challenge and systemic change. Thank you for bringing that up, Ellen, because I think systemic change is something that we need to talk about. So for example, it relates to mental health and well-being. Sometimes, you know, when you're in a marginalized group, you know, I think about colleagues in the States I work with when Black Lives Matter, there was a massive rise in unwellness and sickness in their employees, and they offered specific therapy for that. And they started off by saying, this is not a you issue, this is a world issue. You know, it's not that, if you look at all the statistics, LGBTQ plus people particularly struggle with their mental health, particularly trans non-binary, particularly, you know, if there's other intersectionalities, race, neurodivergence. And that's because the world, what's happening in the world, the systems aren't, you know, set up for those marginalized groups. So as Jamie pointed out, it's not that, you know, I think about, you know, all the incredible trans and non-binary people I work with who are just incredible humans. It's not because they don't have enough psychological resilience that they're struggling just now. It's because they're seeing things every day in the paper, you know, on their phone, on their screen, and it's attacking something that's really personal about their identity that they can't change. And I think something relieves in people when they realize this. It's not it's a personal issue. It's a, you know, it's a systems issue. So that's really, really important. And I think to answer how you tackle that is training your staff on power and privilege, getting them to reflect on their identities. As Jamie rightly said, there's all identities that we feel a bit vulnerable about. I'm sure everybody on this call, Lindsay, Kirsty, if you really dug into your identities, there's ones that you'd be like, oh, I'm a bit vulnerable about that, and I've experienced a bit of discrimination in the workplace. You might have experienced sexism, ableism, you know, all these different things. So once you get people to reflect on their own experience, where they hold power and privilege, where they don't, and then think about times where they felt excluded or haven't belonged, they can very quickly then connect to why somebody else might not feel that they belonged. And that's how you often get buy-ins. It's that training of your staff. Yeah.
I think just to follow on from that, Lou, one of the other questions that were submitted before we started, there's an organisation who have a number of employees who are part of the LGBTQ plus community, who from polls and things feel that they are very well supported. So they're not sitting as an organisation with an issue. Where they feel they've got a bit more of a struggle is to support a colleague who is in the period of transition, who is coming out, who is changing their identity, who's changing their orientation, and they're not entirely sure how to support them through that process. So what additional support can you put in place? There may be other factors to that. So there could be factors around family acceptance. So it's not just what happens in the workplace, but if you've got a lot of other things going on out with the workplace, how can the workplace support you through that period? And Jamie, I'll probably call that one out to you first, if that's okay.
Yeah, having had direct personal experience of doing exactly that, yeah, I can talk to that because it's, I don't want to swear, it's very, very scary. And I was very lucky in the sense that my people in my team in my workplace are very accepting, and it was fine. I think it's important to say, okay, I'm going to rewind. If it's okay, I'm going to rewind just a little bit because this is a really good segue from the process types, the principles and process stuff that we were just talking about, as in having the training and everything in place. Because if you've got all of that, that's a good starting point. My feeling is that there's always a challenge with cultural stuff in a business. There's even a saying that sort of says, you know, if you want to change the culture, you have to change the leadership, right? So there is typically cultures that are embedded and very, very difficult to change, and no amount of paperwork on shelves or in PDFs on people's laptops actually make lasting change. So you know, as a leader, you know, I think it's, for me, it's important. I've probably got slightly more a firm view on it, you know, because Leah's talking about training and how to kind of help people along. From a leadership point of view, I think it's about kind of being very clear about what the rules of there's a few R's here, actually. You could write it down if you like. The rules around these things are within these four walls. What our culture actually stands for, even if it's at odds with what's outside in the world. And then there's an ongoing effort of, you know, respecting others, responsibility for calling things out and reviewing how you're doing. So with that kind of virtuous circle, I hope, you know, we're not trying to get it perfect first time, right? We're just saying this is how we go about doing it. So that's the foundation for all these things. That's the foundation that I sort of came out into, because we'd already had a couple of people that came out previously to me, and they had a good experience. And I actually tugged at the ear of one of them to find out if it was going to be okay before I did. And they said, and it was lovely to hear that they had had a good experience. I think one of the big gaps that I experienced was vocal support from other members of leadership. So, which can make you feel very lonely, right? So it might be that everybody says, yeah, it's all fine, and actually nobody really wants to talk about it and assumes it's going to go away. And then the next day you turn up looking different and everything's changed. You feel super awkward. Nobody wants to talk to you. Not only does nobody want to say anything, they just don't want to talk to you necessarily, and it all becomes very, very difficult. So I think vocal support and visible, I suppose, visible support, right? So interpersonal support, as well as sending an email out to say, you know, we support this individual, we support what's going on, et cetera, et cetera. That sort of stuff makes a huge difference for people, because then if you've got the backing of the business, if everybody knows that you've got the backing of the business, they're not going to have a go at you in the same way that they would if they thought that the business weren't backing you. The same as the situation with government, right? You know, people feel that it's okay to be transphobic because, you know, essentially, societally, it is, right? That's what the government is saying at the moment. So you know, that happens. So we have to be careful in our businesses that we change that and make a situation where that is not okay.
And yeah. I think it's really important for managers and leaders in the business to understand how to educate their wider teams as well. So how to educate managers to be supportive, to make sure we don't get into situations of poor mental health. Now,
so can I just, sorry, Lindsay, can I just jump in on that though? Because what I think is really, really important is, it's easy to say training, right? But actually, the reality of it is day-to-day managing interactions, right? And giving everybody the responsibility to stand up for other people. And there's a particularly important thing which I think we miss a lot. And I didn't realize it was a thing until I actually got myself into that situation. I'm one of the owners of the business, but when I was in a room and people were saying things that were inappropriate around me, I found it difficult to say anything because I felt that I was going to be branded a troublemaker, right? So, you know, nobody wants to have criticism leveled at them, especially by someone who's essentially, you know, according to some other people in the business, might feel like I'm just being weird, and I'm trying to protect myself. That creates a huge amount of friction. You need other people who are not directly affected to understand that there is a rule of how we interact with each other in a business, who will stand up for those people, right? The person who is sitting next to me when I'm experiencing a sort of microaggression or some scenario, who will stand up for me. And that has to be something that isn't about training. I mean, obviously you've got to train people, but like it's about day-to-day, like sort of embedded interactional you know, mechanics. And if you're not doing that, then all the training in the world isn't gonna make a difference. It's about calling these things out every day.
Yeah,
starting with leadership down.
Yeah, I would echo that. And we don't do any awareness training anymore. We don't do any LGBTQ plus awareness training because it's not an awareness issue. It's an action issue. It's a culture issue. We do bystander training. So I totally echo that, Jamie. My heart sinks sometimes when I hear organizations doing awareness training, and I go, and then what? You know, what afterwards? Because those day-to-day behaviors. To share some stories in organizations we've worked with of examples of fantastic active allyship. Sitting at a team meeting, we were going in to present, and somebody said, oh, such and such is coming later. She's coming later. And somebody said, oh, they use they them. And they went, oh, thanks for letting me know. Just that moment, made my
Exactly.
heart, I was like, we'd worked for them for 6 months, and I thought, I love that someone did the labor for that person. In the same organization, someone transitioned, and somebody got them a pack with their name card and another bit of office stationery with their new name and pronouns. Like, that's an example of active allyship. There's a thing called compulsive identity labor, which means that when you have a marginalized identity, so for example, you know, being gay myself, I'm much more likely to get involved in a network, not because I really want the extra labor. They're never paid. Often they don't have budget, you know, but I can't help myself because I'm affected by the discrimination. So you have this weird push and pull with networks sometimes in organizations where you feel compelled to help because you're suffering the discrimination, but you often don't have the time capacity or want to be in those spaces where lots of microaggressions are happening. So I think recognizing that's really important. And that's why we need lots of active allyship. It's about training people from, as you say, leaders, managers, you know, from a non-LGBT background. And also to say, yeah, calling in is what we train on rather than calling out, because what we've found in organizations, all the research has shown, shame is, you know, when someone, we've all done it. I'm sure every single person on this call has said the wrong terminology or the language and you went cringe, or someone's picked you up on it and you thought, oh yeah, I've said that thing and I shouldn't have. So shame just closes us down. We stop learning. So we teach calling in, which is bringing people along in your learning. And that example I gave at that team meeting is a perfect example of calling in. They didn't say, oh, it's not she, her, it's they, them. I can't believe you said that. They said, oh, just to let you know, she uses they, them now. And the person said, thanks for letting me know. And they just moved on today. So I think, yeah, active allyship, is paramount. And I've seen, we're lucky to work with lots of organizations where, we see active allyship in practice all the time. People doing the work around the people to support them. So to stop, and just to say quickly as well, the thing around one size fits all, we've written trans inclusion policies for organizations, but it's always about speaking to the people. I think about 2 scenarios over the last few months, 2 people transitioning in the workplace, 2 totally different experiences. You know, one person agreed that actually I just want you to email everyone. I don't want it to be a thing, and very much led how they wanted to transition in the workplace. Whereas the other person had a totally different idea of what worked for them in terms of being very vocal about it, speaking at the team meeting about it. So you can have a policy, but it's about, you know, it has to be person-led. What works for that person? What is doing the labor, so giving them lots of examples of things you can do for them and letting them pick what fits them best. So not saying to them what's the best thing to do, because then the labor's on them to tell you all the things they want to happen, but it's just saying to them, how would you like to share it with the team? Here's 2 or 3 options. Which one do you think would work for you? They'll let you know. So I think be very much led by lived experience. You know, I think about those 2 people, you know, if you said to one of them and we'll send an email, they're like, no, I want to tell everyone. And then the other person, they're like, oh God, no, like, please, you do the labor. I'm off for a few weeks. I'll come back in. And then I want business as usual. Yeah. And those are 2, because we're all human and we all like things done differently.
Yeah.
Kirsty, do you have anything else to add? I've just got one more final point and question to cover off, but do you have anything else to add to that just before I do?
No, I'm happy to move on to the next point.
Great, thanks. So I think something that's probably a bit of a headache for a lot of organisations at the moment is the recent UK Supreme Court ruling around sex under the Equality Act, referring to biological sex. Now, that there's quite a variety of what organisations have done. Some have come straight out of the traps and have put out very black and white policies. Other organisations are waiting for more guidance from the Equality and Human Rights Commissions. And some organisations are sitting thinking, we don't really know what to do here. And yes, there's the policy and governance and the legal side of that, which we're not going to cover today because none of us are legal experts, but there's the impact of what that means for the community when organisations don't think through the impact. What does that mean for employees? How does that make employees feel? And what can we do to make sure that we don't get this wrong as organisations, that we take our employees and our partners on the journey to make sure that we make the right changes in the right way. So Lou and Jamie, I'll pass over to either of you that wants to kick this off.
Well, if it's, I'll go. If it's okay, Lou, is that all right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's a really sad situation. The background of this is, an organisation within the government, the HRC, who have an agenda, and they are doing what they can to twist the High Court ruling to make it sound like it's now law to restrict access to the bathrooms for trans people, to put it simply. That's a really difficult thing. So I think the first thing it's important to do is for businesses to understand the law, right? So not doing what the EHRC recommends is not breaking the law. Not saying anything about it is also putting trans people in your work at risk. So because all people we've discussed about the sort of vulnerability and safety situation. If there is silence, we assume that we are not safe. And so I think it is incumbent upon any business that wants to call themselves in any way an ally to make as long as it's not legal to literally ban people from the toilets. And even then afterwards, I would suggest create your own reality. As long as that's the case, they are vocal about what the policy is that supports their staff. Because otherwise you're going to have trouble with getting people into the office. It's a problem for everybody. You're going to have trouble with medical issues. You're going to have people feeling emboldened to have a go at other members of staff. And the reality is that with this ruling is actually causing a situation where it's not just about trans people, it's about people accusing each other of being trans when they're actually not, because they're not kind of gender conforming enough. So it creates this kind of divisiveness in our society. And I think as a business owner, I'd hate to think that was happening in my workplace between my staff.
Yeah.
So how do organisations tackle this in the right way to get an outcome that's positive for everyone?
You've got two choices. Sorry, go ahead, Lee. You've got the answer.
No, go for it. I was going to say organisations that have done this really well have spoken out. As Jamie said, silence can be very oppressive, and silence means you're not actively, it's like the active allyship. Silence is the opposite of active allyship. Lots of the organisations we work with have done this really well, and I've actually used it as a connection and relationship building, because a lot of them wrote out to say, we're following this closely. So it's signaling straight away, we are aware of what's happening. We're following it really closely. There isn't any clear legal guidance, but we're following it closely. We know it's important. We know the impact it'll have. And then they've said, especially on the trans non-binary people in our workplace, there was 2 organisations we work with who actually offered funded therapy support to any trans or non-binary people, and some adaptations in terms of, please, if you want to work from home. So to me, that was full of humanity and full of care, which I know, that's the thing legally. There hasn't been a judgment. I could speak about this, but I think most people want to know is what is the best next right thing to do. That's what the organisations we work with.
Yeah.
What do we do? And I think it's about making a statement to say that you're following it closely. You're not committing, because actually, as Jamie said, there is not any legal guidance. A lot of people got a bit mixed up with EHRC, so there isn't actually any clear legal guidance yet. But just let your staff know we're following it closely. We understand the impact this is going to have, but we want to make sure that these people in our community are supported. And as Jamie said, when you support one minority, you support all minorities. It's letting people know when things change in the wider workplace, for certain people in our community, we will pay close attention because we care about it. That same organisation, when disability benefits get cut, sent out an email and said, we're aware this is happening, just to let you know, here's some support. So I think this is a comment, I think, in the wider world, but to do things with care creates culture and changes culture. And people feel that care. I'm sure we've all been in workplaces that have been with care and without care. And we know the difference. And we know which workplaces we stay in longer. So I could give you all the statistics about workplace, about talent retention, about how more successful they are. But when we think about our own lived experience, we know how it works. So yeah, I would say that would be my advice. If you're one of my clients, and also to say we do 3 15-minute plug consultations if you do want to book in. Quite often people want to do an inclusion statement or a trans inclusion statement, or that we're more than happy to do that, because we work with lots of organisations. We always say we don't want money to be the barrier to doing the right thing. And we know budgets are tight just now. So if you're thinking, we just want an inclusion statement, or we just want a statement to our staff, then book in something. We're more than happy to share some best practice and templates and things. That's no problem.
That's fantastic, Lou. Well, I'm afraid we're out of time. So thank you so much to all our panelists today. Thank you so much to everyone who's come along. If you have any questions after the event, please feel free to get in touch with us. If you would like to speak to Lou about the services that she's just offered, if you would like to know any more about Lifelink Workwell, please get in touch with us, and we're more than happy to talk you through that. But yes, thank you very much for your time today, everyone, and I hope you have a lovely afternoon.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much. Have a good day.
Take care.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.